Well, good morning again, and welcome to Brant Community Church. My name's Dave, and I'm the lead pastor here. We're so glad to have so many of you here today as we continue in our series, What on Earth Am I Here For? It's hard to believe, but Elvis Presley died 42 years ago in 1977, and he was only 42 years old. I remember the day, where I was, what I was doing when I heard the news. If Elvis was currently alive, he would be 84 years old. Can you imagine those hips at 84 years old? I mean, they would have had surgery by now, and he would have been Elvis the titanium pelvis by today. But I'm thinking about Elvis, and I was thinking about his music, and I think about his music influenced culture so much. But I was also thinking of Elvis. I thought, I wonder what he would look like at 84 years old. So I thought maybe I could find out, and it says he looks like that. 84 years old, that's what he'd look like if he was still alive, although the conspiracy theorists said that he is still alive and he's selling hamburgers somewhere in Michigan. Elvis is one of the most successful artists of all time. He changed the course of music in our culture. He made these movies that he made were the predecessor to our Hallmark movies today. Men, you can thank him. Elvis had a huge influence. Listen to this. He sold 25 million albums, had 18 number one songs, greater than any artist of all time, more than 40 top 10 singles. He made 33 movies, and his greatest hits album on iTunes is still one of the most popularly requested albums. He has his own Sirius radio channel, for heaven's sake. He's in the company with the Beatles and the Boss and Buffett and Sinatra and the Grateful Dead. But he died at age 42. Struggled with obesity and drug dependency. And most people who knew him right around the time of his death said that he was unhappy, lonely, unfulfilled, and very broken. He had all the success and money that most people in our culture long for today. He had so many things that we desire after, success and fame, but he was missing just one thing: purpose. Purpose. You may say, well, was his music not his purpose? No, music was his addiction. Music was used to take his mind off this longing for purpose, this lack of purpose. Here's how I know. Because his wife, Priscilla, was interviewed not long after his death, and this is what she said in the interview. Elvis never came to terms with who he was meant to be or what his purpose in life was. He taught he was here for a reason, maybe to preach, maybe to save, maybe to serve, maybe to care for people, and that agonizing desire was always with him, and he knew he wasn't fulfilling it. So he'd go on stage and he wouldn't have to think about it. Elvis hadn't a clue where to begin to look. In a sense, she said, he was lost. And when I look around into the eyes of so many people in our culture, I think that's what I see. I can't always describe what I see, but I think the word that best describes it today is they're lost. They don't understand purpose. They don't understand why they're here. They don't understand what's going to happen to them after life happens to them. They don't know why on earth they are here or what they're here for. And many of them have so much money, so much success. They have all the toys and trophies that money can buy. And yet words to describe many are discontent, unhappy, miserable, lonely, and discouraged. Many hiding behind a plastic smile of a self-created image. Many of them giving into addiction and compulsive behavior just to numb out the pain. Maybe there's times you felt like Elvis. Like you just wonder, what am I here for? What's my purpose? What am I really supposed to be doing? But you have no idea what that is. You hope to find it. You hope to find that purpose that makes a difference in life. Well, that's what these 6 weeks of this series is all about. That's why we're spending time in small groups for 6 weeks. That's why many of you are reading the book, What on Earth Am I Here For, kind of devotionally, so that we can understand what is our purpose and answer that big question in life. And we've looked at 3 purposes so far. The first is we were created to be loved by God and to love God back. That's worship. We understand the love of God. We worship God in love back to Him. The second thing we said is that we were created to be connected in genuine relationships with each other. We call that fellowship. We have worship and we have fellowship. And the third one is that we are created to be more like Jesus. We call that discipleship, and we looked at that last week. As I said, God uses 4 chisels to accomplish this purpose. We looked at that last week. Providential relationships, practical truth. We talked about the painful circumstances, and we talked about the wounds of others. The wounds of others. And last week, I know a lot of you had kind of questioned me or talked to me about it, and really were trying to understand better, or at least talk more about this idea that I shared last week about the mugging and surgery, the difference between the two. The mugging is when something happens to you, a painful circumstance that seems to have no reason or purpose. Maybe there'll be some results, but there's no reason or purpose, not even from God's perspective. Where surgery is different. Surgery is when God does His work on us. It can be just as painful as the mugging, but God does His work so that we will be conformed to be more like Christ. And the question I got is, why do the muggies happen? Well, surgery happens because it's the will of God. It's the will of God to make us more like Jesus. Muggings happen for 2 reasons. One, it is the world that we live in, a world that is fallen and broken and sinful, and often the choices of others and the things that happen lead to this mugging with no real reason behind it. The other is that we are in a battle. We have warfare. There's the evil one who is trying to wreck your life and my life and the lives of people around us. And sometimes mugging is the result of that. And so we talked about that last week, being crafted and created to be the image of Christ. And I got thinking of these first three that we've talked about: worship, fellowship, and discipleship. And I thought about them, and I thought, the primary focus on all three of those is me. It's all about us. It's all about who we are. But the last 2 purposes, I think, are different. They are for the benefit of others. If the first 3 are about nurturing ourselves, the last 2 are going on mission to make a difference to others. The first ones provide us security. These last 2 will bring us significance. And to be fully alive, we need these. So here's what I want you to do for a moment. I want you to take a deep breath and hold it. Ready? Take a deep breath. That's inhaling. That's worship. That's fellowship. That's discipleship. Now exhale. If you haven't passed out already, exhale. That is what we're going to talk about today, serving. And next week, Mark's going to look at the idea of mission. It's an inhale, exhale. We inhale, worship, fellowship, discipleship. We exhale, serving and mission. If all you do is inhale or all you do is exhale, you'll either have a panic attack or you'll pass out. That's what will happen. That's why we need to have both. We need to have both. But too often I see Christ followers in churches focused on inhaling. Well, let's worship. Let's discipleship. Let's have fellowship. And there's not a lot of action and a lot of exhaling when we talk about, well, let's have service to others and let's be on mission. We need to inhale, but we need to exhale. Because if all you do is inhale, you're full of hot air. That's just the truth. And so we come to the 4th purpose today, and it's this. We are created to serve God by serving others, and we call that ministry. We call that ministry. You see, I'm not just the minister. All of us are ministers. I get paid to do what I do. You're just good for nothing. That's just what I wanted to say. There is this divine drive in every one of us that we want to make a difference, that we want to serve others, that we want to care for the needs of others. I know that to be true, whether you're a Christ follower or you're just checking things out or you're here for whatever reason because someone said, we'll buy you lunch, whatever. I know this is true of all of us, that it's hardwired into us. That's why people join Rotary and Kiwanis and Lions, why they volunteer in various charities, why people get involved in community serving organizations. It's is why people spend money to go on mission trips and humanitarian aid adventures. That's why. Because something happens when we do that. It feels good and we like the feeling. When we do that with the right motive and not so much we get something out of it, but because we purely want to give, it does something inside of us. And we all know that to be true. You and I were wired to make a difference. That's our key purpose. And the key point that I want to get across is that we were created to make a contribution, not to be a consumer. We were created to be a contribution, not to be a consumer. We all want the sense of security. We want worship. We want fellowship. We want spiritual growth. But we were also created for significance. And that comes when we serve others, no matter who they are. That's our mission, to make a difference. You see, what matters is not the duration that you are on this planet. It is the donation of what you do with your life. It's not the duration, it's making a difference. It's making a donation, it's making a difference. You know, lots of people today in our culture, they're trying to figure out how to live longer and longer and longer. Why would I want to live longer if I'm not making a difference? Why would I? And yet people do that all the time. God wired us up with a unique gift. We have temperaments, we have personality, we have unique passion, experiences, and abilities. We would call it our unique shape. And those of you who are in small groups, you're going to find out more about that this week. But we have these unique gifts that we use, and temperament and passions, not so that we'll be consumers or collectors or hoarders of all that God gives us, but that we would be contributors, that we would share them with others. We're created and we're called and commanded by God to be servants on mission to make a difference in the lives of others. And we're not just talking about those who are followers of Jesus. We're talking about making a difference in our world in general. If you've got your outline and it's in the message, the program that you're given, there's a message note side. I just want to kind of walk through these first 3 points. First thing I want to talk about today is called the poem of a servant. You're kind of going, a poem of a servant. I don't even like poetry. Hang in there, you'll be okay. It says this in Ephesians chapter 2. Because of God's great love, God who is rich in mercy. Look at, God had a love for us, and he made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you've been saved. And God raised us up to be with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms. He's saying that God loved us, God created us, God has saved us, he is raising us, he's seating us, which means these last 2 are important. We get the same inheritance that Jesus does. This is what God did. This is how God has served us. We go on. In order that the coming ages he might show incomparable riches of his grace expressed in his kindness to us in Jesus. In other words, we're going to get to heaven. We're going to look back and we're going to say, look how he served us. Look at the love, the grace, the mercy. Look what he's done. And he says, for it is by grace. It's not what we do. It's a gift of God that you and I have been saved. How? Through our faith. And it's not of ourselves. It is a gift of God. This is the gift of God's service to you. And he says, you can't work for it. You can't do anything about it. It is what he gives you as a gift. So he's not talking about serving because of what he has given us. He's talking about serving because of how he's created us. For we are God's handiwork. The Greek word there is poema. It means the artist's masterpiece, the finished work of an artist. It's his great story, his great epic poem. We get the word poem from that. For we are God's poem. We are God's masterpiece. Why? Because we are created in Christ Jesus to do what? Good works, beneficial works, purposeful works, works that make a difference. Which he what? Prepared in advance for us to do. He prepared us in advance to do this. God prepared the work for us, but God also prepared the work in us to do the work that he has in mind. As I pondered this verse, I thought it all of a sudden came to me. Don't ask me why my head went from here to what I'm going to take you, but it's the way my thinking goes sometimes. But I was thinking about this idea that God prepared us in advance to do the work, and then he gifts us, he wires us to be able to do it. And that's what I realized. This is what this verse by David is all about in Psalm 139. He says, you saw my unformed body. He's saying, before this, you created me. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. All of these great things. And then he says, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. I realize he's saying, you created me to do something. That these ordained days were about doing something. And so we see this poem. We are God's poem. We're created. This is his purpose in our lives, to serve him. We serve him when we serve others. But we need to drill down a little deeper than that. And so I want to talk about the posture of the servant. That's the poem. Here's the posture. And it's found in Galatians chapter 5. And we looked at Galatians last summer when we talked about, how these people were free. They were free from following any of the edicts or the law of the Old Testament. Nothing in the Old Testament they were to live by. They were free from it. They were free from that. The Judaizers wanted to drag them back into it, but they were free people, free to live as God created them. And then it says this in verse 13 of Galatians 5. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. He's saying, you're free. No longer are you obligated to follow the rules of the Old Testament. That's what he's saying, the law. He said, but don't use your freedom to do something. He says, you are free, no longer obligated. So with this freedom, you have to do something with the freedom. And he gives us two choices. And the first choice is indulging in the flesh. Indulging in the flesh. Now, the word flesh here is used a little different than other places. In some places, the word flesh is used to talk about sinful choices. But the way the word flesh is used here, he's talking about selfish choices. Now, sinful choices are selfish and vice versa, but he's primarily looking at, in the context of this, selfish choices. It means to please yourself, to be self-focused. Me is more important than we. It's about doing what pleases me. It's about pursuing and indulging what my desires are. He says, one of the options is you can choose to make it all about you, this freedom. You can make it all about you. Or rather, this is a very interesting word. We'll see it a few times. It means now I'm going to flip this over. It's going to be completely 180 degrees different. Rather, your other option is to serve one another humbly in love. That's option number 2. He says you have two choices. You can have this freedom and make it all about you and do what you want and make it, your pursuits and your desires. Or he's saying rather you should do the different one. You should use it to serve others. You should serve others. It's not about pleasing you, it's about serving others. It's all about you or it's all about others. And there is no middle ground. Rather doesn't leave us any middle ground. It is either this or is this. So you choose not to say, well, I'm not selfish. If you choose not to serve, yes, you are, according to this. You are. You don't serve others out of obligation because the law we're no longer obligated to, and you were. But he says you have an opportunity now to do something with your freedom, to serve or to be selfish. It's your choice. And he goes on, verse 14. He says, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command, love your neighbor as you love yourself. He's saying the law is fulfilled in keeping one command. Jesus said the one command had two parts. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Paul already had talked about that. And now because of the focus and the context, he says, love your neighbor as yourself. This is what motivates us to serve. We are to love our neighbor. We are to love our neighbor. And when he talks about love, he's not talking about emotion or feeling at all. He's saying you want to love your neighbor, whoever your neighbor is, just serve them. That's all I'm asking you to do. You want to love someone, just serve them. And he goes on to verse 15. And he says, if you bite and devour each other. Now, something was going on in one of the churches in Galatia where something was happening here. I doubt that it was literal. That's just my guess, but I doubt that it was literal. Actually, this little phrase in ancient Greek was often used to describe a dog fight. A dogfight. He says, if you get into a dogfight, and a dogfight is all about you, it's all about winning, it's all about having your way, it's all about wrecking another person, or another animal. If you are in a dog fight, you need to watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. What he is basically saying here, he's saying, if you make it all about you, it is self-destructive. If you make it about you, if you're about consuming versus contributing, if you want to only be served and not serve others, eventually you'll be by yourself. I think this is what he's saying. If you only want to serve yourself, you'll eventually be all by yourself. Or to have life your way means that you won't have life anyway. That's what he's saying. That's what he's talking about. You see, serving breaks the control that selfishness has in our lives. It cuts the chain. It sets us free. Just like generosity and giving breaks us free from greed, serving breaks us free from selfishness. If you want to break the back of selfishness in your life, you just need to go and serve others. This is the posture for serving. The posture for serving is to serve others, not serving and pleasing yourself. When we have the right posture, selfishness no longer has reign in us. If you are like me, that's not always easy, because selfishness runs through the veins of every one of us. It's been there since the beginning of time. But if you don't want to give into it, it is about serving others. And so we talk about this poem, we talk about a posture. I'm a visual learner. I like a picture. And so let's talk about a picture of serving. And there is no greater picture than that in John chapter 13. It is a very familiar story. But I read this story over and over in preparation for this week, and I thought, I know what this story is about. I don't even have to study it. And as I was reading it devotionally one morning, I realized there's this little phrase that I had missed all the way through, and it's used multiple times. And I realized by missing that phrase or skipping over it or not giving it the credit that it deserves, the meaning of this text was a whole lot less than I was really getting out of it. There wasn't a richness until I found this little phrase. It says this in John 13, verse 1. It was just before Passover festival. Here's the phrase, 2 words, Jesus knew. Jesus knew. If you have your Bible, you can underline that. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave the world and to go to the Father. Jesus knew it was time to leave. He was going to die. He was going to return to heaven. He knew it was happening, and it was going to happen soon. He knew his time was limited. And then it says this, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. This is an amazing thing. He loved them to the end. Here's why I want to say that. Because they had messed up before, and they would mess up from this moment again, but he still loved them. I want you to think of who this group is, his own, who are sitting around the table. Who are the table guests? Well, there's one guy who's going to betray him, named Judas, another who's going to deny him in Peter, and 10 who are going to run away and abandon him. All the while, before they even get to this point, they're arguing who's the top dog of the disciples. That's the group that's there. And he knew who they were and what they were about to do, that they were going to deny him and abandon him and betray him. And it says, didn't matter. He loves them to the end. That is an incredible thing. And that is a hope and a truth that we hold on to. No matter what we do, he loves us to the end. We read on. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Verse 11. Jesus knew who was going to betray him, and that's why he said, not everyone is clean. I mean, Jesus got it. He knew around that table was one who was going to betray him, one who was going to deny him, and 10 who were going to abandon him. He knew that. Verse 3 says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. He was going back to heaven to be with God the Father on the throne next to the Father. And he had all of this power. He had all of this power. So here's what I want you to imagine. Jesus knew his time was short. He knew he had betrayers and deniers and abandoners around the table. He knew he had all of this authority, that's what this is talking about, and all of this power. What should he do? What would you do? What would you do if you knew that someone's going to hurt you and betray you or deny you or abandon you, and you have the power to get even and to get, to sort it out and kind of bring down, death or destruction? Jesus had all that. That's what he could have done. That's what he could have done. What would we do? I think we would maybe do it differently. This is how I know Jesus was who Jesus said he was, the Son of God, because what he does is what I wouldn't do. You see, he could have indulged in the flesh, but instead he does this. He got up from the meal. He took off his outer garment. It was a different, longer garment. He would have walked over. He would have put on the apron of a servant. He had this apron now around his waist, and he grabbed a towel, and he put it over his arm. And he got down on the ground with a basin of water and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that he had wrapped around him. I don't know about you, but if I knew my time was up and I knew how these people were going to hurt me and I knew I had all the power, is this the picture of what I'm going to do? This is what Jesus did. He became a towel-bearing servant. A towel-bearing servant. That's what he chooses. And I don't know about you, but if he had said he washed their hands, I'd have been good with that. No, he's going to wash their feet. Feet are yucky. My family tell me my feet are really, really gross. I think they're wrong, but that's their opinion. In fact, if I was sitting in our family room and I just had a pair of shorts on in the summer and someone knocked on the door, they wouldn't tell me to put a shirt on. They'd tell me to put socks on. That's how bad my feet are. But Jesus got down and he washed yucky feet just like mine. Just like mine. And he goes on and he says this. When he finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes. So he took this off. And he put his outer coat back on, but because it's so hot, I'm not going to do that. And he returned to his place and said, do you get what I've done for you? Do you get it? I know what you're going to do. I know my time is short. I have all this power and authority. Do you understand? Do you get it? The King of Kings has just washed their feet. And he's not just saying to them, do you understand what I've done? He's saying to all of us, do you understand what I've done? This isn't about feet washing. It's about cross climbing and hanging. He hung on a cross, tortured to death with pain and sorrow. He said, I do this when I could have done it differently. Because I knew how some of you were going to respond, and I knew how some of you would behave, and I knew I had the power. I could have done anything. I could have come down from the cross or destroyed my abusers and my executioners. I didn't. I didn't. And he goes on. You call me teacher and Lord. You hold me up in these positions, and that's who I am. But now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. Okay, folks, it's time to put on the apron and to grab the towel around our arm and wash the feet of others. The most menial task by the most menial servant. That's what he says. This is what you need to do. Verse 15, he says, I've set you an example. Here's the picture that you should do as I have done. Now that you know these things, now that you understand, you will be blessed if you do them. When we put the towel over our arms, when we're willing to do the most menial of tasks, to serve another person, whether they deserve it or not, he says, you will be blessed. Makarios is the Greek word for that. It's, the Beatitude, same word. It means to possess the favor of God, to be satisfied, content, significant. It's happiness on steroids. This is what you get if you do this. And it makes sense. We know that to be true because when we do serve, although we have limitations to our serving at times about who we serve and what parts of the body we would watch, like feet, we won't want to do that. But when we serve, we feel better. We feel something different inside. What do you feel? You feel blessed. You feel more like God. So how did you see, when we serve God by serving others, we are blessed by God. That's just the reality. You're blessed by God. How did Jesus serve? How did he do this? What's the character behind it? Well, real briefly, I just want to look at three of them. Number one, he served in humility. He served in humility. Says this, do nothing out of selfish ambition. This is ambition that is all about you. We need to have ambition. He's talking about selfish ambition, where this is all about you. This is the whole idea, indulging in the flesh. Or vain conceit. That just means empty glory. Like you're up there puffing out how good you are and trying to act how good you are, but inside, there's nothing substantiating it. So don't do anything with those attitudes. Rather, there's that word again, in opposite. In humility. In humility. I got to tell you, the Romans hated humility. It was not one of their virtues. In fact, it was a sign of weakness. It was a sign of weakness. Many people in our culture today don't like the idea of humility. It seems like a sign of weakness, a character flaw, some sort of shortcoming. Jesus said, Paul said, This humility deal is strength and it's power to be humble. And he says this, that we are to what? Value, consider others above ourselves. If there's a pecking order, you need to put other people higher in the pecking order than you. Jesus hated the pecking order. He hated it. That's why he so often said, the first will be last. The greatest in my kingdom will be a servant. He hated the pecking order. And he's saying, you need to humble yourself. Do what I did. You put others ahead of yourself. That's what he did. It's how you become more like Jesus. Not looking at our own interests, what's all about us, but each of you to the interests of others. Now, he's not saying ignore your own interests. He's just saying that they shouldn't be all you think about. That you need to think of your own interests, but you need to think of the interests of others. And if you have to err, if it's 50-50, which way do I go? Go on the side of the interests of others. That's what Paul is writing here. And then he says, in your relationship with one another, have that same mindset as Jesus. And then he gives us the mindset, who being in the very nature God, he was God in every way. He didn't think equality with God was something to be used to his advantage. Right? Because he had the power. He had the power at the foot washing, but he didn't use it to his advantage. Even being God in the flesh, he never used that to be his advantage. Even God in heaven, he never used it to his advantage. He didn't think it was something he had to hold on to. Rather, there's that word again, the complete opposite. Made himself nothing. No reputation, no fame, no nothing. By taking the very what? Nature of a servant. The nature of a servant. He became a servant, being made in human likeness. You know what that phrase, being made in human likeness, is? That's somebody who wears a size 50 pant trying to squeeze themselves into size 30 skinny jeans. That's what it is. That's the picture. I know some of you are going to go, oh, I wish you hadn't have said that. But anyway, that's the picture, squeezing yourself down. And being found in the appearance as a man, that's the ultimate humility for God. Is what did he do? He humbled himself. He humbled himself. Humility is a choice. We choose to be humble. It's a choice, and he chose it. I want you to imagine what difference it would make if you were more humble, that you chose to put other interests ahead of your own, to not be selfish, but to value others. Think of what that would do in your marriage. Think about what it would do in your workplace. Think about what it would do with your family and your friends and other connections you have. Imagine what it would be like in your life to humble yourself. It's hard, it's challenging, but the payoff is so good. Secondly, it's sacrificially. Same text. And being found in the appearance of man, he humbled himself by becoming what? Obedient to death, even the death on the cross. Sometimes when we serve, we have to sacrifice. That's a hard one. That's a hard one for some of us. It says this in Matthew 20, verse 28. Just as the Son of Man, Jesus, did not come to be served. I didn't come to people to serve me like I deserve. No, I came to serve others by putting a towel over my arm and to give my life as a ransom for many, a ransom for many. The word ransom creates this picture in my mind. There's hundreds of people on a plane, and they pulled down to an airport, and they've been taken hostage. And because of who they are, and because of their nationality, and because of these terrorists, they're all going to be put to death. There's no negotiation, no nothing. They're going to be put to death. There's no way out of it. And this very prominent person, very significant person, walks out on the tarmac, and he starts to yell at these terrorists and say, I'll tell you what, I'm this person with, you would rather me dead than all of them. So I'll tell you what, you let those hundreds go and you can kill me. I will pay the ransom price with my life. That's what Jesus did. That's sacrificial. That's sacrificial. That's what it means. I remember when I was a kid, growing up, my dad was in seminary, and we were pretty poor, like I call it food bank poor. And I remember I wanted to go to this, it was a junior hockey game in Toronto. There's lots of sports there. And I remember it was $5, and my mom told me we didn't have the money. And I, in my humility, ranted and raved and screamed and went in my room and slammed the door. Because it was about me. And I was pretty upset. And about 2 days later, when the game was to happen, in the morning, my mom said, you can go to the game, here's $5. And I didn't get it, but I went and enjoyed the game and it was fine. A couple of days later, I asked my mom, I said, by the way, where'd that money come from if you didn't have money anyway? Kind of holding out on me here a little? And she said, your dad had to go without coffee or lunch, and he had to almost walk half his way to school because he didn't have enough bus fare. That's what Dad did. That's sacrificial. It might seem small, but it was huge to me. And that's what serving sacrificially is all about. It's big in small ways. And then lastly, it's availability. It's availability. Right after Jesus talks about sacrificial service, about ransom, he then demonstrates. I love how Jesus talks about it and then demonstrates it. And it says in this story in Matthew 20, just after, it says, Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho. And a large crowd followed. They're all his admirers, high-fiving Jesus. He's wonderful. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us. The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet. You know what? You guys aren't worth Jesus' time. He's busy with us, doing ministry. He's got healings to do. He's got other things. You guys aren't worth it. But they shouted all the louder. Can you imagine? It's kind of like one of those 2 groups yelling at each other. And it says this, Jesus stopped. See, I think a lot of times we focus on the steps of Jesus. We need to sometimes focus on the stops of Jesus. Jesus stopped. And he called them. Said, what do you want me to do for you? He asked. And Lord, they answered, we want our sight. And Jesus had compassion on them, touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight and they followed him. What if Jesus had said, hey, these guys are right. I'm way too busy. I'm not available. I got my stuff. I got to do it my way. I got my agenda. I haven't got time for you. They would have died blind. But Jesus, even though he was busy, he was available. He was available. And if we want to be used by God, we need to be available. And the idea of being available is being open to interruptions. Open to interruptions. If we want to be used by God, we need to be open to interruptions in our schedule. It's about taking our schedule and holding it very loosely and saying, okay, God, it's yours. If you need to interrupt me in this schedule today, go to it. It's all yours. You see, if you want to know if you have a servant's heart, you just have to check on how you feel about interruptions. Do you see interruptions as an irritation or an invitation, of pain or purpose, obligation or opportunity? I love this verse in Proverbs. Never walk away from someone who deserves help. Your hand is God's hand for that person. Don't tell your neighbor, hey, maybe some other time, or try me tomorrow. When the money's right there in your pocket, he says, don't do this. Don't be against interruptions. You know what gets in the way of interruptions? A few things. My thinking. Do you know what my thinking is? I have my agenda. I have my time schedule, my objectives, my goals, my dreams, my priorities, my desires. It's all about my. You can't be a servant with my thinking. You can't, because you have to value others. The second is this, time. Some of us are so crazy busy that we have no time to serve, because busyness is the enemy of compassion and serving. Too many people are busy seeking success and all those that brings, and they don't have time to be interrupted. Sometimes it's just simply distractions, right? We're responding to too many distractions, and we just get so distracted that we don't have time to care for anybody else. And then lastly, it's waiting for it to be perfect. Wait till I'm healed. Wait till it's the right time. Wait till I have the right heart. Wait till I deal with the things of my past. Wait till the kids grow up. Wait for my job slows down. Wait for I have more money. Wait till I retire. Wait till life is perfect. Then I'll serve somebody. Too many of us are waiting for the conditions to be perfect. I'm here to tell you, they're never going to be perfect, so stop waiting. When we don't give in to these reasons, when we start to be available, guess what God gives us? He gives us this gift. You know what it's called? The gift of attention, the gift of noticing. We notice when we are available. Jesus noticed because he was available. I mean, it's so important. And so we can't wait for it to be perfect. We can't give in to the distractions. Can't always be about our time or my thinking. We need to be available. When we're available, we'll notice. I think of when I stopped being unavailable in ministry, because I got real busy at seasons. And I kind of said, enough is enough with all that other stuff. As I got more available, I got this gift of noticing, and I've noticed more people, and I just kind of walk into their world because I just notice more. I would never be there. And I still miss people. I still get busy, but I think I've got better. John Wesley, one of my favorite heroes of faith, had this quote. He said this, "Do all the good you can by all the means that you can, in all the ways that you can, at all the times that you can, to all people that you can, as long as you can." I'd add another line to this. I wrote my own line. So get off your can and start serving who you can. He was nicer than me. But we need to take the apron and take the towel and wash the feet, even to those who we think might hurt us or ignore us or betray us or abandon us. We need to have that posture. The posture, it's not indulging in the flesh, but serving one another in love. We need that picture of Jesus in our mind, and we need to serve like Jesus, humbly, sacrificially, and with availability. Let's pray. Oh, Father God, you make it so easy for us to serve. So easy for us to serve because you served. You served us. You raised us. You loved us. You gave us kindness. All of that to us. Jesus, you served on the cross. You demonstrated it when you took off your coat and put on the apron and the towel. You've given us a model to serve. May we serve you that way. Because it says that when we serve you that way, we are blessed. And may more and more of us find the true blessing that comes when we find the purpose of serving others. And we pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.